Now, the rest of the subgenres are fairly self-explanatory. Folk metal utilises folk instruments and folk musical motifs and tends towards paganism instead of Satanism. Symphonic metal adds symphonic instruments obviously, and has a very dramatic feel. You might have heard of Nightwish, that's what they are. You can also get heavier variants like symphonic death metal, and if that sounds like your cup of tea, I would recommend Flesh God Apocalypse. Then there's blues metal, which has a very bluesy sound to the riffs. Both Motorhead and Pantera frequently dabbled in blues metal fretwork. Neoclassical metal is metal with a strong focus on musicianship, and songwriting with similarities to classical music. The best known artist in this subgenre is Swedish guitar god Yngwie Malmsteen. Yeah, good luck spelling that. And so that leaves us with just one more subgenre which isn't quite so obvious and doesn't neatly fit under one of the primary subgenres I outlined earlier. Metalcore. The name Metalcore derives from the fact that this subgenre blends elements of hardcore punk with elements of various metal subgenres. Metalcore is a strange combination. Working with my theory of primary subgenres, it takes a little bit of everything. It typically uses 7 strings, combines screams and growls with clean sections, and has melodic guitar harmonies. A common metalcore motif is, instead of the constant tremolo riffs of thrash metal or death metal, metalcore bands often play riffs with a sort of broken up sound. Small pauses are used to add emphasis. It's kind of hard to explain, but here's an example. Notable bands include Killswitch Engage, Trivium, Bullet for My Valentine, and Avenged Sevenfold. A7X, as they're sometimes known, really made a name for themselves when they put a greater emphasis on their melodic elements on their 2005 album City of Evil. Their soaring popularity from this point soured the metal elitist view of metalcore, but I'll admit that a lot of their songs are actually pretty catchy. In a similar way that some industrial metal artists occasionally attracted goth kids, for a good while in the early 2000s, metalcore was the subgenre for emo kids. Since metalcore was really the last time in recent memory that metal came close to mainstream success, it has unfortunately resulted in the conflation of metal fans with emo kids, which is a misconception that is still very much alive and well in the sad depths of Facebook comments.
Bruh.
The large emo following that metalcore has, combined with the fact that metalcore involves a lot of screaming and growling, is partly where the term screamo comes from. Now, fair enough, use it for edgy emo metalcore bands, but you cannot, and I cannot emphasize this enough, you cannot start calling every band that uses harsh vocals screamo. You imbecile, you fucking moron. If you call a death metal band screamo, I will come to your house and tear off each of your toenails individually. You fucking moron, you dipshit, you waste of human resources. The subgenre has evolved somewhat since then, incorporating electronic elements and a bit of pop, and as a result, what little interest I had in the first place is now entirely gone. I do like Architects though, they're very good. Metalcore was the big subgenre of the 2000s, but the subgenre that has dominated the 2010s is Deathcore. It started in the late 2000s, but really picked up in this decade. Deathcore takes some of the ideas of metalcore, tears out the melody, and takes all of its metal influences from death metal, rather than the mixed bag approach of metalcore. The guitars in Deathcore are tuned down to an insane degree, often resulting in what's known as chugging, which is when they pan mute the top string and it makes a noise that can be best described as a chug. Sometimes the guitars are so down-tuned that you can literally hear the string wobbling from how loose it is. The vocals range from low growls to high shrieks, and while death metal tries to go faster towards the climax of a song, deathcore goes slower into what's known as a breakdown. This was started in metalcore but became utterly fetishized in deathcore. The idea is that if you slow a riff down, it feels heavier in an almost literal sense. Plus, it makes the riffs easier to move to. In terms of notable bands, the best known is probably Suicide Silence, who really cranked up the edginess. Suicide Silence managed to attract an emo fanbase, which caused the metal community as a whole to try and distance themselves from deathcore, even though it can hardly be called mainstream. Consequently, this then resulted in a lot of deathcore bands insisting that they aren't deathcore, even though they clearly are. Despite its dodgy reputation, I actually like a bit of deathcore when I'm in the right mood for it. The right mood being angry. Some deathcore bands worth checking out include Thy Art Is Murder, Whitechapel, Job for a Cowboy, Rings of Saturn, Infant Annihilator, whose music videos are juvenile but hilarious, Black Tongue, who play 9 strings for fuck's sake, Signs of the Swarm, whose vocalist sounds like a fucking sink drain, The Acacia Strain, and Bro Job. Another band that was quite important in the early deathcore scene was Bring Me the Horizon. I say was because after the first couple of albums they dropped deathcore for metalcore with electronic elements, and with every subsequent release they have softened their sound and dumbed down their music into inoffensive, easily digestible pop music. Because they started out as a metal band, metal news sites still cover them, but make no mistake, Bring Me the Horizon are not metal anymore. And they don't hide it, they say this themselves. At this point, Bring Me the Horizon just sound like what would happen if Billie Eilish could actually play an instrument. Move! The deathcore scene really started to die out in 2017 when Suicide Silence released an album that attempted to use clean vocals, and they were subsequently memed into oblivion by YouTuber Jared Dines. Deathcore can work with clean vocals though. Seriously, just listen to the latest Whitechapel album. Now, you might be thinking that deathcore and metalcore sound similar to gent, and you'd be right. They use the same kind of low tuning on the guitars. The difference is, gent tends to be a lot more technical and musically complex. It also incorporates far more experimental elements and unusual time signatures, whereas deathcore and metalcore are almost always in your standard 4/4 time signature. You could maybe argue that gent is progressive metalcore, but Meshuggah have been around since before metalcore was a thing, so that's why I personally recognise gent as its own separate subgenre, rather than simply being progressive metalcore or progressive deathcore. One other note, the term metalcore can be used to refer to deathcore, but not the other way round. So, while deathcore is metalcore, metalcore is not necessarily deathcore. Metalcore is sometimes used to describe modern metal in general, although when people are using it that way, they'll simply say core. And the mere mention of the word core is enough to send metal elitists into hysterics.
Core? Core? Core!
So those are all the main subgenres explained, but we're still not done. I should also explain what I call modifiers. These are adjectives that get put in front of a subgenre when describing a band's sound, but don't refer to an entirely new subgenre in itself. For example, technical death metal isn't a subgenre, but it's accurate to describe some death metal bands as technical, because their take on death metal is especially complex and difficult to play. So here are the most common modifiers. Blackened means that it takes some influences from black metal. Progressive means that it gets a bit experimental. Melodic is fairly self-explanatory, as is atmospheric and symphonic. Extreme is obviously just a particularly heavy variation of a given subgenre. Some people like to treat extreme metal as its own subgenre, but I think it's far too vague for that. Because by doing it that way, you start lumping Meshuggah, Cattle Decap, and Burzum all together in the one thing, and they aren't similar enough for that to work. So I'm not really on board with that theory. Then of course we have the nationality of the band, which often gets thrown in front of their subgenre when they're being described in album reviews and articles and all that sort of thing. Don't get confused. All it means is that's the band's nationality. No subgenre is exclusive to a given country. Norwegian black metal is just black metal made in Norway. Grind can be added to a subgenre's name to suggest a grindcore influence. For example, I have frequently heard people refer to Cattle Decapitation as a death grind band, meaning they're a mix of death metal and grindcore. Now, death metal and grindcore are already very similar, but death grind basically describes bands who frequently utilise the signifying tropes from both subgenres. Core can also be added to the end of a subgenre to suggest a metalcore influence, but be wary when you see this, because unless the core in question is one of the subgenres that I've already described, then this label is probably being used derisively. For example, certain black metal bands like Dark Funeral, who focus less on atmosphere and instead put emphasis on speed and aggression, are often referred to as Norsecore. They are almost exclusively called this by true cult black metal fans who hate them. The implication is that their particular style of black metal is watered down and attempts to be more mainstream. I mean, it really isn't. It really fucking isn't. I guess this is the kind of perspective you'll get if you just never interact with normal people, but yeah, you're not gonna hear Dark Funeral on Capital FM, guys, Jesus Christ. Which is why I take that modifier with a pinch of salt. Now lastly, we come to joke subgenres. These are the ones people refer to ironically, but don't actually recognise as a real musical movement. Most of these are lyrical, as in the gimmick of the subgenre is pretty much entirely defined by what the lyrics are about. Some of these do have more than one band in them, but the only consistency between those bands is the lyrics rather than the actual sound. We have pirate metal, Viking metal, Christian metal, vegan metal, historical metal, Ned Flanders metal, gay deathcore, suicidal depressive black metal, national socialist black metal, and of course in response to that, anti-fascist black metal. But you can also get joke subgenres that have nothing to do with the lyrics, such as crabcore, which is literally just metalcore except they squat like crabs when they play. Seriously. This was a thing.
I like crabcore.
What the hell's crab whore? Sounds like a bad porno.
It's when you get really down low and you strum a guitar at dick level, like this.
Bro metal refers to very mainstream metal bands that a stereotypical insecure tough guy would listen to. None of the bands that we categorise as bro metal would call themselves that because it's a derisive joke subgenre. The target audience of bro metal tends to be guys in their 20s and 30s who drive pickup trucks, drink more Monster Energy than water, and won't wear anything that doesn't have the fucking Punisher logo on it. Every single bro metal song is either about getting in fights, being a proud American, or licking the boots of the military. So basically Godsmack, Five Finger Death Punch, and any other band that's basically just a heavier Nickelback. And lastly, there's kawaii metal, which fuses metal and J-pop into a terrifying abomination that must be purged with fire. You might have heard of the band Baby Metal, which has 3 young girls singing cutesy Japanese lyrics over metal riffs. Baby Metal were at best mildly amusing for the first 3 minutes, but they have more than overstayed their welcome, and their meme status has sabotaged every poll about the best metal albums and songs in which it's featured. Oh, at last, I have finally finished explaining all this. Once again, I would like to emphasise that this is my system of labelling and that other people's definitions of these subgenres may differ greatly from my own. This has been how I understand the subgenres, and I hope that this has helped you understand the differences between them. I tried to cover everything, but if I missed any out or you want to hear about one in more detail, let me know and I'll make a follow-up. Every time I think I know everything there is to know about metal, it finds a way to surprise me. After all this, if you hear someone say that all metal sounds the same, you have my express permission to cape their face in.
In a video game.
I'm Perg, and I need a nap.